I've been doing this work for over 20 years now, change work for over 20 years now. And when I first started, I knew that leaders needed to be involved in change, which is kind of an obvious statement, but it wasn't really clear to me how I would involve them. It couldn't be delegated to me solely, and I knew that. But explaining it to leaders in a way that they can understand and really make it accessible was the challenge that I ran into. And luckily, I worked with Ed, I guess it was 8 years ago, something like that, on a big change project. So one of the things that's great about bringing the two of us together in this change work is that Ed can talk about change from the standpoint of someone who was on the receiving end of change management and change leadership support. So he can make it very understandable from the standpoint of a leader. So he has helped me bridge the gap a lot with how to explain it to leaders.
Yeah, I think it was useful for me to be able to go do the things that I wanted to go do, but I didn't know how to do them. And Roxanne was able to help me understand how bringing change management into this programmatic work that I was doing years ago would actually be successful and not a silly science project, which is kind of how it showed up to me initially. So she was able to help me understand really what was going to make it useful, which was awesome because it was so effective.
Right. Sometimes as change professionals, we can use our technical lingo and it can be a little distancing. So anyway, so that's what Ed's helped me with quite a bit. So let's first talk about the role of the leader in change. So we have a very simple way of thinking about it. We think of a role of the leader as a person who creates the condition to make it easier for people to do things in a new way that will achieve the value of the change. So as a leader, you have huge influence over a lot of people, right? But you can't make people change. You can try, but really you can't make them change. So what you're doing instead is creating the conditions to make it easier. When you think about things like psychological safety, that falls into this definition. So how can you make it easier for people to want to do the thing that you need them to do? And what kinds of conditions can you create? So let's talk about some examples, and I'm sure that many of you can think of examples. You've seen these before: modeling behavior you want to see, making sure you're not in the way of progress. We've heard a lot about telling the why behind the change and why now, explaining how what they need to do differently is important, connecting them to that why, rewarding and amplifying progress, acknowledging what's in the way and then doing something about it, or at least acknowledging that why you can't do something about it is all part of creating the conditions. But the big one, and the one that we really want to talk about next, is tuning into what's at stake for people, right? And that's where you can really figure out what you can do as a leader to create the conditions to make it easier. So that's the impact assessment. So if you're a change professional, you understand the idea behind a change impact assessment, right? You've probably done very detailed impact assessment work as part of the change work you do. What this is a leader's viewpoint of it. So it's much more simplified.
Yeah, and this is probably where I got the first aha moment insight into how this kind of work, change management in general, could be something that was going to be useful for me leading a large program, because I just hadn't really thought about it like this. As I read these questions, even now, they seem pretty straightforward, but they were a revelation to me. Back when you're in the heat of the moment, trying to take care of all the things you need to take care of, and you barely bring your head up to pay attention to what's going on. This is not obvious. And so having somebody to kind of guide me through it was incredibly valuable. And it gave me a different way to think about it. And we made significant moves as a result of this process that Roxanne has?
Yeah, so these questions, again, if you're a change professional, they may seem overly simple, but you'll at least be familiar with them. What do people need to do differently? What is the expected reaction and why? Those are very revealing. The answers are very revealing about what's happening in the environment. And leaders don't necessarily think to ask those questions. What does successful implementation look like is really about starting to understand what it would look like ideally if people were changing. Like, what are the signs that you would want to see that people are making progress toward doing those things differently you need them to do? And then, are there any pressing needs today? And that's really often about communication. What are people craving to know, or what aren't they aware of at all? So that question is often about communication. But the piece at the bottom is about an intention. And this is where, again, this idea of creating the conditions is relevant. So if you want to if you as a leader are intentional about how a change can feel, how the change process can feel, you can create the conditions in order to make the change process feel that way. So asking yourself, how do you want people to feel about the change process? And then what would help them feel that way is the answer to, okay, well, here are the things as a change leader I can do. And it's not so much about the change itself, right? Because that's not what we're asking. We're not really asking, how do we want them to feel about the change? Because that's the decision. What we as change leaders want to know is, how do we want them to feel about the process, the experience they have in making this change?
Yeah, I think this is a part where there's kind of a part of a wake up for me. And I would say Roxanne probably had to ask these questions 2 or 3 or maybe 4 times for me. Because my initial reaction was, what is the expected reaction and why? I don't care. They're supposed to go do their work, right? That's what you're supposed to go do. Right. I have all these things to do. Go do it. Right. What does successful implementation look like? It looks like doing it. That's what successful implementation looks like, doing it. And so it's a little bit of a, yeah, Ed, sure, but if everybody's mad or burned out or beat up, right, what does that increase or decrease the probability of success? Are you increasing or decreasing the amount of risk that's associated with it? I'm like, so sort of like a unhappy puppy. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. All right, so fine. I can't just jam it in and make people do it anymore. So it is really valuable. And I say that because it's easy to look at this and go, yeah, so what? It's not really that insightful, but it was in the moment, especially when things were difficult and we're trying to be able to take on something that was really, really hard.
Stuart is saying he appreciates your
answer. Oh yeah, thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, so why is this? I mean, why is it so hard for leaders? I mean, if you put yourselves in their shoes for a minute, they're very busy. We're all busy, right? They're subjected to a lot of pressure. They're managing the people that report directly to them and a lot of people who don't report directly to them. They're managing up, down, all around, right? And, we're all doing that to some extent, but leaders really have a lot of pressure on them. So what that costs is, decrease in attention to things like this, right? It's oftentimes leaders just need to be reminded that these are the things that you can ask yourself to get some insights and then put into action through the way you influence the organization. So these are your basic questions, and which leads us to the next thing that we wanted to share. And this came up for us a while back. People are not usually upset by what is changing. Where they get upset is how change is handled. So it's not really the what, it's the how. And of course, people don't always like the change that you are introducing naturally, right? There are lots of reasons why people don't like the change, even as basic as, I don't really want to think about work, and now you're making me think about work. I was just in the middle of optimizing my work, and now you're making me think about doing something else, like that's just a drag. So there are lots of reasons why people don't have a positive reaction to a change, but it's not usually about what, and that's because most employees understand that businesses have to change, they have to evolve. Where they really get upset is how the change is handled, because that's where they can feel disrespected, or they can witness others being disrespected. So that goes back to the how, and that's again where the change leader comes in. So this is a big idea as it relates to what a change leader can do.
Yeah, and I think it's useful to just to make that, Roxanne made it, but just to punctuate that distinction. We'll talk to people and they'll say, well, the group doesn't get to decide what we're going to go do. And like, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what the leader is about. That's the what. You get to decide that you need to implement this new CRM. You get to decide that the merger is going to happen. What's going to be rough is when people get run over the top of, and that's the how, right? And that's where things like people don't like change. I'm like, well, there's some of that for sure, but I think a lot of what people don't like is how change happens. They're not going to say, oh, we're unhappy that we're a thriving concern and now we get to do a merger and get bigger and stronger. That, no one says that. What they say is, wow, we got a lot of work we're going to have to do and we got to jump in and take care of all of that. And if you're going to drive them over the top, that's when they're going to start pushing back.
So one of the things that we advocate for leaders to do is something we call a change leader's empathy cycle. And this is something that leaders do throughout a change, right? This kind of process where they understand, generally speaking, what the impact is, right? They ask themselves these questions about, okay, how are people impacted by this? And then based on that, what kinds of information do they need to hear from me now? Or what kinds of conditions can I create to make this easier? And then I communicate something, and then I see how it lands, right? How did it go? Were the reactions what you expected? Were you surprised by anything? Why is that? What can you learn from that and integrate into your understanding of how people are impacted? And then again, decide what to communicate. So it's like this constant cycle that a change leader is doing. And the idea behind this is that a leader tunes in by asking themselves these questions in the stakeholder impact assessment, and then it's an active role they're playing as the change progresses. So as you guys know, this change is a learning process. You're taking in new information all the time. You're understanding how people are reacting and then deciding, okay, so what am I going to do in response? And so on and so on and so on. So that's why we think of this cycle as something that's really useful for a change leader to have with them.
Yeah, I think this is an example. Roxanne will use this description a lot of what we're doing here is thinking about empathy in practice, like how to actually make it real. We joke about, hey, people have discovered empathy recently. So now empathy is a thing. Like, really, congratulations on discovering empathy. It's great that people are talking about it, but I think it's also useful to think about what are the practical ways in which to go do that. Because it's one thing to say, hey, you should go be more empathetic. If you're not already doing it, that's probably not particularly helpful. Right. Start talking about what could you actually go do. Start thinking about these things, ask these questions. That's a little bit of the value in that impact assessment, at least from my point of view. I want to be empathetic. I want to be a great leader, but I'm super busy. What do I go do right now? And This is a way to kind of ground it, make it easier to pull that together and actually go do something with it.
Yeah, and then one last point on this. Of course, you're not going to be able to get it right every time, right? the expectation is not that you ask yourself these questions and suddenly you know what everyone's thinking and feeling. That's not the point. It is, as Ed just said, tuning in. It's empathy in practice. It's trying to figure out, well, if I were to put myself in their shoes, what do I know? And what don't I know? And is that a problem that I don't know, right? You start to tune into, how much don't I know? Or what do I think I know and what tells me that? You start to imagine the signs that you should see in the environment of progress or risk, right? As a change leader, these are helpful mindsets. These are helpful tools for you to understand. Here's how I need to be an active part in this change. So that is the stakeholder impact assessment. Very simple tool for a leader. And so now we want to connect this to joy. So we are in the process of studying joy, especially joy at work. And we wanted to share a few things with you. One is the connection between change and joy makes a lot of sense to us, which is what you'll see on this next page. So this goes to what we've been saying. So when you introduce a change, you're having an impact on the culture, what we would think of as joy at work. What you see on the right-hand side are the 10 dimensions that have come out from the research about what must be present in order for people to thrive, really feel joy in the workplace. So when you introduce change, depending on how you do it, you can either increase joy at work or decrease joy at work. The other thing that's interesting is, depending on how much joy at work is already in the organization has an impact on the change, right? How well it goes. So it's cyclical. Again, going back to this idea of the change leader's empathy guide, the idea would be introduce the change in the best way you know how and is reasonable, and then see how people are responding. Are you noticing a diminishing of these traits? And what might you do to adjust how you're doing the change, right? Creating the conditions so that these things on the right-hand side can flourish. So that's how we see these two connecting.
So Sue made a comment about showing this as a process, and we think about these 3 layers for how this all comes together. So that there's a bunch of people who have project management backgrounds that are on this webinar right now. That first layer is the project management piece of it, right? So do you go get the thing done? Did it land inside the triple constraint, scope, schedule, and budget? Has that all happened? For the people on who are change managers, you would go, yeah, fine, but not good enough. Because the next thing is you have to get all the humans to adopt it in the way that you want it, right? And so that's the change management thing, is to go make it happen. You can land the new CRM. It works perfectly. The IT people will tell you that it's shiny, clean, and perfect. But if the humans that are engaged with it don't go do new things around sales, don't do new things with regard to customers, you're not getting the value out of it. And that's the change management part. This is the third part for us, which is, what is a cultural impact? And so when we think about those impact assessment questions, this is again why they're not trivial, right? These are about trying to use those to drill down and ask, and maybe ask again and again, to get past what's going on in the project, because there's lots of tools to go do that. What's happening with the change? There's a decent body of knowledge around that process as well, but what also is underlying the cultural piece of it? So how do you use a tool like that to really understand all of that and potentially do something great, or at a minimum, don't do something damaging, so that we're not having less joy at work, damage or crack to the culture as a result of that, whatever that change is, whatever that interaction is.
Yeah, and we believe that even the change, you can introduce a change that people really dislike and still grow joy at work. We've had that direct experience, and we have helped organizations do that. And I'm guessing that many of the change professionals on this call have had that experience as well. So we wanted to share just a little bit of some of the things that people have told us in the answer to the question, what does joy at work mean to you? These are the things that people have said to us. I would imagine it's not particularly surprising, but it's interesting how consistent it is.
You guys might think for yourselves too, what does it mean for you? And we've been doing interviews, which we'll tell you about in a little bit. And it's interesting to see in some cases how much people have to say, and in other cases how little they have to say, because they just haven't, maybe they haven't thought about it. Maybe they don't think it's possible. But joy doesn't live where I work. But in most cases, people have something to say, even if it's not what's there, it's what they would hope would be there.
Yeah, and one of the things we noticed with this question, we'll show you the next question in a second, but what we noticed in people's body language with this question is they jump in, but they have trouble kind of explaining it. It takes them a little bit of time to get warmed up, and they talk in kind of conceptual language. But let's go to the next slide. In this next one, we asked the question, how would you describe the best team you've ever led or been part of, and what was happening that made it that way? These are the answers that we typically get. And when we ask these questions, people usually light up, like their body language changes. And especially as they spend more time thinking about it and recalling stories. So there's definitely a difference in connection. And we're wondering about, why it's so difficult to answer the first question. It is a conceptual question, that first one. But we're wondering about, do we just not have a lot of experience asking that question or answering that question, especially in the context of work, because the themes that come out are not very sophisticated so far. But anyway, these are the things that you see. These are the answers we get on the best team question. And if you notice in these answers, there's a struggle, right? You can see inside these answers that there's a little bit of a struggle. Like we tried hard and we were working hard and we were overcoming something and we helped each other, and it's this kind of an energy in it. And we recognize that, Ed and I recognize that because we have introduced change that has been really hard, and people were working hard every single day. Like it never, ever got easier to do the work. But the change itself went phenomenally well because of how everyone felt, because of the joy at work presence. And we didn't make them feel that way. What we did was we created the conditions to help them feel those 10 dimensions. And then they stepped into it. Like they didn't have to do that either, right? They stepped into it. So.
I love a solid AI type question. People respond from feeling and heart. Yeah,
that's right.
For sure. That's a great one. I think that, Stuart put in something too about you can't answer it unless you've experienced it. I think that's right. Probably right on, right? So it's a thing to be engaged in, not necessarily solely conceptualized, because I just don't think you're gonna get anywhere. Which is why this idea of describing a best team that's an experience question.
Yeah.
Right. So that it lands for people. You can bring things up, and we've had stuff all over the place from it's the team I'm on right now, and here's why, to I was a 16-year-old Boy Scout, and we went to go do this thing together, and that this is talking to somebody in their 40s that's still lodged in his head is this a remarkable experience, and so it's everywhere, and it's interesting to watch how people can draw upon it. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But when reminded of it, it becomes easier to draw upon that and kind of pull that forward.
Yeah, and then this is, I mentioned, this is the experience that we had directly. We had a situation where we were leading a very, very difficult change, and it was not going well at all. So we were in the pit of despair. And we decided to shift the way we led, and it changed everything. It changed everything about how well the change went. It changed everything about how it felt to be on the team, how it felt to be at work. It was the work itself never got easier, but the change part was so much easier because we were in it together and there's just so much joy present.
Yeah, I think that those last two sentences are really important. The work itself never got easier, right? So we're not talking about somehow taking on an easier project or you're going to make the project easier. Some things are just hard, right? In this particular case, we're at the end doing this rollout of this very large system that we were implementing, and it required a command center kind of setup where people were up into the wee hours of the morning, and then the next team was coming in at 5 a.m. to start. So
for 8 months.
Some people, staying at work past midnight, every night, week after week, and another group coming in for the crack of dawn. And we've never had a team that was any more, engaged and happy than this one. And it was because of this kind of inside out approach and paying attention to the culture, and that flowed into the work. And in this case, flowed out of this team, which is about 250, into the 10,000 people that were impacted across the company, who would tell us that they were feeling it, that their energy level was coming up because they would see it from this group. So it was an amazing experience, and one that we continue to look to replicate and take our learnings from that and kind of drive it along. So Sarah, what was the first thing you did? Yeah, the first thing I did was get my head right, which I know is not a particularly great way to say that, but it was essentially it. Like, first believe that it was even possible to do. There was a process that Roxanne took me and my leadership team through, where she asked us a series of questions. We started talking about recalling what a great team was. I talked about what I wished this team would be like, and she brought that back to my leadership team, and that all kind of culminated in a Friday meeting that we would have every Friday, where I would bring my leaders together and we would discuss what was going on. And it was usually kind of a difficult meeting. And that meeting, because of where we were, often there were people literally phoning it in, right? So they would not come in to the office, they would be on the phone instead of coming in. And in this case, this is all it's all happened. Roxanne has already gone through this process. I'm coming into the meeting late, of course, because it's typical, because I'm getting grabbed by other people. I'm late for every meeting. I come blowing through the room with the intent in my head of, I got to get on the phone and get logged into the conference bridge line, and everyone is in the room. And I'm stunned, and every single laptop is down, and everybody is looking up expectantly at me as I come in. And I, of course, said something stupid like, what the hell's going on with this? Is a holiday or something? I don't know. Something not at my best leadership moment, because I was surprised, stunned by what was there. And it just started, we went through this process of the feeling within that team was different, because what they wanted in the future matched what I wanted in the future. And people started to believe that we could go, do something else and make that happen. And so that was really valuable to be able to go after and pull all of that together. So it made a huge difference to be able to kind of take it on that way. And that was the beginning of the change, the cultural change that we had internally.
Yeah, the reason why it came about in the pit of despair, one of the reasons why it was bad from a change standpoint was our A players, our high performing members were leaving the team. And then people were being forced to stay. This is not an environment that you wanted to work in, right? This is a fear-based kind of culture on the team at that point. And so what I did was I really asked that question about the best team of Ed first, went through a whole series of questions related to that, and then talked to all the people who reported to him, called them his lieutenants that were dotted line reporting into him, asked them the same questions, and then showed them his vision, and they realized, oh wow, we all really want the same thing. That was the start. Once they could start to imagine things being different, then they started to make it happen. And so it was very much an inside out. It just kind of had this ripple effect. We did not focus on the executive leadership team at first, because Ed asked me, why aren't we focusing on the leadership team? I said, no, they're a disaster. Let them be. Let's just focus on your sphere. And with the shift in the team, that came a shift with the leadership team. They got on board because they wanted to know what was happening, and they wanted to get engaged in it. They could see a morale shift. And again, from a change perspective, the concern that I had at the time was that the team was going to produce something that the employees would hate. And that the employees who are on the receiving end of this thing were not going to manage the change well with the customer. To me, it was an obvious ecosystem situation. And so the team had to be the focus. The the program team was not ever really a part of my stakeholder change plan. They were, but not in such a significant way. From that point forward, they always were. It was just obvious to me at that point that they were critical in any change effort. So from that, like Ed said, it was amazing the reception that we got from the employees, and it was amazing the reception we got from customers. There's things we couldn't predict. Again, goes back to this idea, you can't make people change, but when you create those conditions, they step into it and they create joy themselves. And so that's really what they did.
There's a couple other questions here. Wendy asked about separating the project itself from what we were doing internally, so separating the change from what we were doing internally, and then especially when things aren't going, when the change itself isn't that great. In this particular case, the change was beneficial because of what we were putting in place, and so people were not necessarily afraid of the thing we were doing or thought it would be bad. Concerned, of course, about how there was a lot of new things they were going to need to learn. There's a new system and a bunch of new processes and policies that came with it. We have, however, done things where the change was not good, right? Like you're not happy because you're laying people off, or you're having to remove roles, or there's something else that's going on that's difficult. We've been all the way at a place where folks were going through taking out a particular section of the company. And we set the goal that if you saw the people that you're gonna release a few weeks later out on the street, would they walk across the street to give you a high five? Like, this is the how we want that change to go. So even in the context of something that can be as difficult as that, it was still possible to do. Now, to be honest, we actually did not get to a high five. However, a few weeks later, one of the leaders and owners of the company did meet one of the people that was released. They did cross the street and have a great conversation about how well that went, that they had landed in a good place. So it is possible to do with the right intention. And Sarah also asked about what is one of the first things we did. So that mindset change was one of them. The next one that was really hard for me was within the context of these program meetings that we would have where all the information comes in. Those were high stakes meetings for me. Like, everyone is in there, including the executives, all my bosses are in there, and everything is on display, right? So if it's not going well, then I'm nervous about it, as a leader of this group, because now I'm concerned about how I'm being perceived by the executives that are in the room. And in one of the early meetings we had after this, my team is arguing back and forth with how to do something. They're pushing back on me on how I wanted to do, how I wanted to make the next turn. And I can just feel my blood pressure going up and my anger and angst going up. And in the middle of that, I get a message from Roxanne going, "This is great. This is exactly what you want." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? This is not at all what I wanted." But with further explanation. It's like, yeah, the team is engaged, they're trying to solve the problem. And so that was the next thing that I needed to do. And if I was going to give advice to, the people that are leaders out there, is get somebody to provide that outside point of view, because it's really hard to see in the moment. And for those of you that do that work, go tell the people that you're working with, the leaders that you're working with, hey, I'm going to try and provide this outside point of view, because I'll be able to see things that in the moment will be very hard for you to see. And that can be very valuable for you to have. And if they don't believe you, then you can have them call me and I'll explain it to them why that actually works.
So this leads to our another one of our ideas, that before change can happen, the leader must change first. Again, you may have heard this before, but this was definitely a big learning out of the experience we just talked about, right? Once Ed made the shift, it had this tremendous ripple effect about how everything went, right? So he made the shift, and then he created the conditions to make the environment completely different and much more conducive to a successful change effort. So that's what we wanted to share with you.
So we've been doing a bunch of work and actually getting some of the research that we've been doing into writing and getting that out into the world. And so you guys can, if you're interested in any of that, you can follow in with us on what's going on Medium. We've got an article that's on Entrepreneur Magazine, and are working on some other parts as well. And I'll, when we finish this in just a moment here, I'll paste this in the chat for you if you want to go check it out, and you can see what's going on with that. That's also leading into some work we're doing. This is actually one of my favorites, this change analytics concentration, a course that we've put together, which is really the intersection between my background as an analyst leader, Roxanne's background as a change professional in a super analytical environment. So how do you put all of that together and give you some of the tools, some of which I teach at the University of Richmond, some of which two of us have used in the work that we've done, and we've been able to package it all together. So if you're interested in that, our next one's coming up on March 19th. But we thought we'd use you guys as a little mini focus group and ask you, besides the things that we have here around social network analysis and surveys and metrics and persuasions, what other things might you be interested in? Some of the ones that have come up are, how do you analyze the actual survey comments, or how do we do a better job with data visualization? So if you would stick in the comments for us, if we can put something else into this change analytics concentration, what should we put? So we've been playing with some of the different possibilities for structures in there. I love the data visualization thing, because I think we're getting to a place where we are actually able to gather quite a bit more data and be able to take that now and visualize that as becoming much more powerful of a tool. But maybe the world is past and you guys already know all that stuff. So right. we don't need to worry about all of that. But if you have any ideas, we would love to get those. And this fits in as one of the 3 workshops that we do have. So we have been pulling those together into this series. So we have one for leaders, which is the Savvy Change Leader series. We have a certification course for change professionals, and then the change analytics class.
Yeah, and the one for leaders and the one for change professionals, they happen concurrently. And then one of the reasons why we do that is because we often heard change professionals say, I wish I could be in a class with my leader to learn about change. And so that's what this is meant to do, is overlap to help you understand each other and how you work together.
And then lastly, we've mentioned this a couple of times, but we are doing research interviews. Partly for me, I'm going to look to publish in academic journals, and partly Roxanne and I together are writing and putting what we're learning out into the world. Some of that's on our website. You can check it out there. We actually have a whole research agenda is out there if you'd like to see that. And then talking about what insights we've gotten and putting those out into the world. So if you'd like to check any of that out, please do. We're also have some videos of the sessions that we've done with the leaders when we're sharing back with them, which we do once a quarter. Those are out on our YouTube channel if you want to check any of that stuff out.
And we're this close to creating a Joy at Work ebook. This close, we're in editing right now. It's I think it's like 40 pages or so, but it's a practical guide. Anyway, we'll put it out on our site shortly. I'm hoping the next couple of weeks.
All right. Thank you guys for all your comments and about the change
Yeah.
analytics. It's great. We'll definitely grab all of those. And that's what we wanted to share with you. So we thought maybe we'll stop here and see if you guys got any questions. You can just come off of mute if you'd like to do that, or just put a question in the chat and see if there's anything else you want to talk about. Or you're ready to go get lunch, or you're already eating lunch, so you can't talk.
This is Sarah Arnett. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah, we can.
Sarah?
So with the rapid rate of change, and I'm in healthcare and many other industries are rapid rate of change, but when you have a change, Ooh, what was that? So when you, are y'all getting echo?
No, we're not, Sarah.
Oh.
You're just fine.
When you want to do a change readiness, or you think about change readiness, but really, in fact, you don't have a choice about whether you're ready. It's coming anyway because of the decision. You're not in the decision-making mode. And how do you help people that are not in the decision saying, too bad, it's coming anyway?
Okay, well, I guess a few things. The first thing that comes to mind is we ask 3 questions. We'll say, here's the decision. What do you like about it? What do you find challenging about it? And what recommendations do you have for overcoming those challenges? And so that speaks to people don't usually have a say in what the decision is. That's why decision makers are paid to do their decision-making work, but they can have a say in how the change goes and what you might do to introduce it. I don't know, Sarah, that you have that much time to ask those questions, but being able to get that kind of input can be helpful, especially if people say, well, you know, I had this change happen a long time ago and that really went poorly, so don't do that, but this change happened and that really went well. And you can ask, okay, so why did that go well? And just kind of get some of their thoughts on the kinds of things that you can do to make it easier for them.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, sure.
Other thoughts or questions, guys? All right, well, it is 1:15, and we want to make sure that we're letting you guys go because I'm sure you got plenty of other things to do. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing a couple every month all through the year. So stay connected and see what we're up to. See you guys.
Thanks, everyone.